Well, you know climate hysteria has officially jumped the shark when Chris Bowen is the voice of moderation. In a development so ironic it could be mistaken for satire, Chris Bowen, Australia's Minister for Climate Catastrophism, has gently told the United Nations top climate spokesperson to, just maybe tone it down a notch. Imagine that. Chris Bowen, who once warned that climate change is the greatest threat to our national security, telling the UN's climate spokesman to cool his jets. The UN's Executive Secretary for Climate Change, Simon Steele, flew into Sydney this week to deliver his latest end-of-days prophecy. Unless the Albanese government doubles down on its already economy-pulverising green energy targets, Australia will descend into a Mad Max-style famine. He said, and I quote, "Mega droughts will make fresh fruit and vegetables a once-a-year treat." I've got to say, as climate hysteria goes, that's a big call. Imagine a future in which bananas cost more than a small car and an avocado is auctioned like a Picasso. The good news is, if unions have their way in this country, we might just beat climate change to it, but I digress. Simon Steele said that if the Australian government doesn't increase its emission reduction targets, our GDP will take a $6.8 trillion hit by 2050. So if we don't completely destroy our economy with emission targets, our economy will be completely destroyed anyway. I think that's what they call climate science. Naturally, this sort of doomsday poetry would usually have had Chris Bowen reaching for the nearest megaphone and wind turbine. But in a surprising display of uncharacteristic restraint, or maybe just realising that climate fear-mongering is a foolish game of ever-diminishing returns, Bowen responded with what can only be described as a passive-aggressive eye roll. Bowen said, and I quote, "Targets are easier set than met," which translated, I think, means, look, mate, we're already bankrupting ourselves trying to meet the last targets. Bowen, of course, added, and I quote, "We'll set a target informed by the expert advice in the national interest." In other words, we won't be bullied by a bedwetter from the UN when we've got our own bedwetters here in caucus and in the Senate. Which reminds me, as climate theatrics go, it's pretty hard to top Green Senator Nick McKim's complete climate breakdown back in 2023.
People are dying.
Senator McKim, resume your seat.
Sociopaths like you.
Senator McKim,
I'm not going to cop interjections from sociopaths like Senator Canavan.
Senator
I will
McKim, resume
not cop
your
it.
seat.
And what they've got to answer for is death, disease, displacement, starvation, people dying of thirst, arable farming lands turning into desert, and most likely billions of people dead by the end of this century.
Oh, my goodness. But back to the UN's climate spokesman. When Chris Bowen is listening to your climate rhetoric and saying, maybe a bit much, you might want to review your messaging.
How dare you?
For his part, Bowen was quick to remind everyone that Australia is already producing record renewable electricity and that our energy emissions are lower than when the Albanese government took office. He left out the part about record energy prices, Sydney-siders being told not to turn their dishwashers on after dinner, and industries fleeing the country, like climate activists fleeing a logic seminar. The reality is that for all his flaws, even Chris Bowen knows that eventually someone has to explain to actual voters why their actual power bills are skyrocketing and why their air conditioning only works on Thursdays. And while the UN's Simon Steele may believe that a hotter planet means Australians will be reduced to bartering for mangoes in the ruins of Coles, some of us still think it's more important to keep the lights on and the economy functioning than to impress bureaucrats in Brussels. In summary, when Chris Bowen is the adult in the climate room, you should probably check your thermostat, because either hell has just frozen over or someone finally realised that fear doesn't generate electricity.